Welcome to Comic Book Herald's Creannotators. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of Comic Book Herald, and I'll be interviewing some of my favorite creators in comics about specific runs, graphic novels, or series, looking for their insights on inspirations behind the work and ideas or potential hidden material readers may have missed. Today, I'm excited to welcome Tyler Boss, the artist of Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, one of my favorite comics to recommend to comics-curious readers, and the current number 54 on the best comics of all time list, which might not sound that impressive, but it's an extensive list, and 54 is very high. I just want to be clear about that. So, Four Kids Walk Into a Bank is a torrid tale of child crime and one of the funniest and most impressive works of the last 5 years. Tyler, thank you for joining me. And how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I wanted to kick things off. We're going to talk hopefully in a little bit of depth about the Four Kids Walk Into a Bank 5 issues and your work on it. I did also want to touch on, kind of your comics career, some other work you've done, for example, on Lazarus,
Mhm.
and your upcoming work on Dead Dog's Bite, a creator-owned, if I'm not mistaken there, written and drawn by yourself series that will be coming out in the nearest future, hopefully.
Yeah.
So we'll get to all that. But first off, what inspired this particular work, the Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, and kind of how did you arrive at the project?
Um, so my co-creator with it, Matthew Rosenberg, we both
Mhm.
worked at a comic book shop, Forbidden Planet, in New York City together. And I was going to school at the time at the School of Visual Arts, and Matt had sort of just decided to transition from. He worked in. He had a record label that he ran for a long time, and worked in like screen printing, but decided he wanted to be a comic writer. So we both started working there at the same time, and we lived serendipitously, weirdly, like a block away from each other.
Yeah.
Where he had lived there for years, and I just moved there, and weirdly got the same block. So it was all this weird serendipity. And long story short, we constantly bouncing ideas off of each other about things, story ideas, comic ideas, different things like that. And at one point, he had an opportunity to pitch Black Mask, which they had just sort of become a publisher,
Yeah.
and Matt had been involved with them with Occupy Comics. And from that, he got the chance to pitch. And so he had 3 different pitches he was working on. And he threw out 2 of them, and I said, I hate those. And then he threw out a third one. I didn't hate them. I just didn't think I'd be a good fit. And then he said,
Sure.
well, I have this other one, and it's about children who rob a bank. And I said, yeah, cool, I'll do that one. Which, without even really saying, he wasn't even asking me to do them yet. But I was like, no, I'll be good at that one. So yeah, he sort of just had this idea of he wanted to do a story about children who were, ostensibly seem smarter than the adults
Yeah.
in the world, and that's sort of where we started crafting it.
Awesome. That's very cool. I do want to ask too. So you met working at a comic book shop
Mhm.
as a creator. What if anything did you kind of learn about the medium or the business side of things working at a shop, or was it just a kind of a gig as you were working on things on the side?
No, it was definitely a very intentional job to learn about that side of the business. I feel like it's good for any creator or somebody who wants to be a creator. Maybe you don't have to work at a shop, but at least go into a bunch of different shops and see how they run, see how they lay out their shelves, understand like what the direct market side of it is. Because how, a big thing that me and Matt did, and Four Kids wasn't huge, it's still very much like, I guess, an indie darling. It was that fair? I don't. It's
Critically
a
acclaimed and respected for sure.
yeah, but it's not as though like it's not if you say the title, it's not like everybody knows it. And so, the reason why we were able to get into so many shops is because we did a lot of retailer outreach and talked to retailers about what they need. I did a thing in Portland called what is it? Oh geez, I'm blanking on the name now. It's the Retailer Summit, the Diamond Retailer Summit. And this
Uh-huh.
past February, me and Matt went, and actually I had preview copies of the first issue of Dead Dogs, and I had one retailer scold me because I put the title at the bottom of the book instead of the top.
Oh,
And there's different things you learn um, talking to different shop owners and working in different shops, just industry trends you see between certain months you notice on the racks that every single cover was predominantly red,
yeah.
and just different things like that. So you really, it's kind of invaluable, I think, because I was going to school learning about comics, and then when I was done with school, I would immediately go and work in the comic book shop, and then I ride my commute home with the guy that ultimately would be my lifetime collaborator, and we'd be talking story and different things. So for me, it was completely invaluable.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Um, you mentioned going to school during this. One thing I was reading some interviews with you prior to this, and one thing I found interesting is you're kind of in the process, it sounds like, of building for kids kind of as you were finishing school. Like
Mhm.
your first, if I'm not mistaken, and you definitely tell me if I am, like your first issue was kind of your final thesis, if you will, in school. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was for the yeah, it was my the first full issue that I did for that. We ended up redraw like I did a redraw of it. Like if you think about like I remastered it
Yeah,
essentially like a year or
yeah,
two later. But the storytelling was all the same. It was just trying to level up the drawings, the look of the art when we officially got it picked up. But yeah, I did that, and that's also a cheeky way I think of me and Rosenberg saying that it was edited by David Mazzucchelli because
yeah,
he was
yeah.
my
That's so
teacher.
cool.
Uh, but it's not totally true. It's a little cheeky to say that.
Well, and you had also Klaus Janson as a teacher at the same school, right? So
I did, yeah. Not
were
that year.
you?
I had him my second year, but I had a pretty close relationship with Klaus. I was his assistant for a year-ish in there where I'd kind of go over and help him with computer stuff.
Very interesting. Were you a huge fan of those guys? Kind of like, are you like, have you been a comics fan kind of all your life, or do your artistic influences come from a wider range, or like where do those particular like
Oh, for sure. I
kind of
mean,
icons stand?
yeah, I mean, I've been a comics fan my whole life, so I
Yeah,
went to SVA specifically because of Klaus and David. And I came in as very much sort of like a superhero kind of guy, like very mainstream, and then immediately upon getting there, fell very heavily into the indie stuff.
yeah,
And that came with having teachers like Gary Panner and David Sandlin and Nick Bertozzi and those guys. And so just in the more alternative side of comics. And so then my influence now ranged across all comics, although I will admit I have a very small knowledge of manga and Japanese comics. But then
sure.
I'm also just like, and I think it's pretty clear in Four Kids, you can see that me and Matt are both also huge movie fans.
Yeah,
And so you see a lot of, I'm doing a lot of like Paul Thomas Anderson, Igmar Bergman type close-ups and different
hmm
sort of weird stuff like that. Or like, there's a couple of Hitchcock tricks that we threw in there for like tension stuff. And so it's a lot of movies and comics. Is where all that stuff comes from. But yeah, I think I answered the question.
yeah, totally. No, that makes sense. So I do want to touch on that then. So Four Kids is consistently full of really fantastic jokes. And one thing I noticed in this book is it definitely requires more, I think, on your part, on the art side, to sell the comedy, in a way
Mhm.
that, for example, like, superhero comics, they don't have to do this as often. How do
Sure.
you find yourself like designing scenes to reflect the tone? Or like, what is the process of, I don't know, studying body language or anatomy even in terms of selling comedy on the page? Because like you said, it's, a lot of these jokes you could see playing fantastically in TV or movies, and selling
Mhm.
them in comics is obviously different. So what is that like for you?
It's all so one huge benefit of being good friends with Matt is that when I read his scripts, I know how he's telling the joke. Like I don't
Yeah.
need like I have his voice in my head, so I know how the joke is supposed to be, or if I was with him, how he would say it to me. And so from there, I can either tweak the joke or try and improve upon it. But doing comedy in comics just requires a high panel count because
Mm.
you need to have setups and reactions and different things. And you can kind of look at it like a Sunday strip, right? Where a Sunday strip is one gag essentially. And so if we're doing multiple gags on a page, that's why sometimes we're ending up with 64 panels in a spread or,
Yeah.
a minimum 12 panels per page. And I like working at a high panel count anyways, because I think it just gives the reader more. And I think each page lands better because you want the page to be its own unit, its own standalone thing.
Sure.
But something that people kind of raise their eyebrows at me when I say this, but I really took it from sitcom sort of staging. So
Hmm.
like you think like Seinfeld or any of those types of shows where it's a set and we have one camera and we're shooting dead on. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the comedy in Four Kids, and you see it too in like people like to compare like Wes Anderson movies or something, but you can do a lot of those deadpan weird comedies with what people would maybe consider a boring shot or an ugly shot. And so what you do is you want to keep it flat and static, but then have the characters really be acting.
Hmm.
and then adding in the high panel count. So it's all this weird math equation that we're doing.
Yeah, no, totally. And I was going to ask about the high panel count because it definitely stands out, I think, from,
Mm.
a like many, even indie comics, we're looking at like 10 to 20 plus panels on a page sometime. Is that something, so as you're doing, I guess, is that like comedy dialogue specific, or you kind of mentioned that being a preference? Is that just a design choice that you find yourself gravitating towards when you're laying out a page?
Yeah, I definitely always add panels. Like when
Yeah.
I get a script from Matt, or if I'm doing it myself, like very rarely will a page be four panels. And we'll do the four panel page when we need the big splash, we need the big moment, so you need the big shot. But I just prefer high panel count,
Mhm.
personally, especially like a lot of the people that influence that I come from, in the indie market, or the alternative market, are high panel count people, and that's just sort of seeped into my preference of storytelling. I
Yeah.
think you can just do more. A problem I have with, not a problem, but it's just my preference. Like sometimes I'm reading a superhero comic or something, and it's four wide panels on 22 pages all the way through.
Right.
And it's just you end up with this weird thing where it's, you have the one action of what the character is doing, and then you have 30 balloons to try and explain like
Yeah.
the story or sell a joke or a piece of dialogue. And for me, I just don't think it reads. I think you're asking the reader to do too much. I think
Mhm.
you're sort of giving them a storyboard as opposed to a comic.
Mm.
And that's just my personal preference. There's people who do it beautifully. I think Jupiter's, is it Legacy, or is whatever one that Frank Quietly drew with Mark Millar. He does a lot of the four panel wide shots, and it works great. But that's also just because Frank's a genius. Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The good ones have a way of making it seem easy sometimes.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
no,
just
I
flow.
think the multi-panel layout works extremely well in For Kids. There are several pages or design choices that really stand out to me, I think, throughout the book. For example, like the way you lay out pages, covert computer hacking is really captivating. It's clearly a very unique process. How and when do you decide to like go for broke on a
um,
design like that? You know what I mean? Because it really
yeah,
stands out in a way that I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This is a screenshot,
yeah. I
compared
mean,
to normal, comics layout.
it's definitely, there was a thing that comes from work, having been taught by Mazzucchelli, which is he's very big on, you don't need, it's a comic book, you're drawing it, it doesn't need, you're not drawing a movie, like you can do different things in this medium that you can't do other places.
Yeah.
And so any opportunity I have where I can go with a diagram, or I can go with, something like that, which is a mix of diagram and then also story intercuts and trying to follow. And I think you can see a bit of the Chris Ware influence in there, where there's
Yeah.
you're not needing to fill up the full real estate of the page, but using the real estate of the page to create the best design you can. It's also weird opportunities too, where it's like Matt, the script page for that is Matt's like, here's what happens or needs to happen. Essentially, like Paige is going to hack a computer, and she needs to come up with these things, and then, her dad and her uncle are going to be having an argument in the background, and he's like, do one of your weird crazy things to make it work.
Yeah.
And because it's a thing where it's, how do you sell a cool computer hacking scene in a comic? You can't do it in the same way as in a movie or something like that. And so I think the medium kind of gives you the answer. It's sort of a thing where it's
Hmm.
like people who teach themselves Photoshop or something like that. Like the tools are all there. You just need to figure out how to plug them in.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because that tension is still there in the scene of the bar downloading, right? And the
Mm.
progress very taking slowly, but you don't have, those like the tension of the music, right? Or the
Yeah.
tension of Paige looking over her shoulder, in movies. So yeah, I think it works very effectively. I did actually write down it brings to mind some of Chris Ware or David Ajaz's pieces, breaking down action into like smaller components.
Mm.
Just like really highlighting individual elements on the page as the action is unfolding, essentially, I think works really well. There's a sequence in issue 2, the same issue, where Paige's dad picks her up from the police station,
Hmm.
and there's a two-page car ride, essentially,
Yeah.
where the page inverts. I don't Again, I'm talking about a book you worked on a few years ago, so forgive me if I'm going too in the weeds, but no, I mean it's probably you poured your heart and soul to it, so maybe you're like, yeah, totally.
Yeah. No, I remember exactly. It is an inverted page for the
it
sake of the joke.
Yeah, it's such a cool it's such a cool way of delivering that scene and that dialogue. In a very, I don't know, almost small way. Like it's easy to blink and miss it, you know?
Hmm.
Um I, I guess for you, does that actually is that a part of, I guess you just said, like selling the joke? Or is that just you having kind of fun with like I wanna try some stuff and I wanna make it, for the people that are really paying attention, like here's a little extra.
Yeah, no, it's all that stuff, and it's a thing too where it's like, okay, I know this is going to be a spread, so when the reader opens the page, they're going to see both of them, and
Yeah.
so I could break the dialogue down a little bit so that if I do the invert, I'm adding panels so that we get each piece of dialogue gets a little bit more of a beat, but then also we have the setup of the joke, which is the kid in the backseat of the car, and then we never address it until the last panel, which
Yeah.
is ostensibly the same. There's also a thing too where it's like, oh, I got a panel here at the top that I can do something fun with. So like the first panel of that double page spread, if you look at it, is actually an Edward Hopper painting
Hmm. Yeah.
from, and then we superimpose our stuff in it. And there's a bunch of weird art history references in there there's a couple that mean something and a couple that are just fun. Um,
Yeah.
and so like there's a lot of those games in there too.
That's awesome. I love that stuff. I have to ask too, is the opening to issue number 5 Watchmen riff? Do you know where it's I get well definitely you would know, but it's like it opens with a yellow clock and it's a 9-panel grid and
Yeah,
it's it's like
Matt.
clearly color coded.
Yeah, Matt wrote that one in the
Yeah.
script. He went, "We're having a clock. It's clearly in a 9-panel grid. It's clearly a reference to something, but God knows what that is." So
Yeah.
that was one that Matt uh, that's whole cloth him. There's also a couple of weird other Easter eggs in that one too. Like I think the principal's name is the current writer of Batman.
Yes.
And
Yes, I did pick that up.
yeah, and we decided that we'd out James as being a big clown fan by putting as many different clown things in the principal's office as possible, which is not a thing that James actually is, but just thought maybe we can create a weird conspiracy that people would start bringing James, I don't know, clown themed things at cons, and he would have no idea why.
I mean, there is a Joker war coming in the pages of Batman, so
True,
you may have been onto something there.
true.
That's awesome. Let me ask, what parts of Four Kids were the most fun to work on? Like, what do you relish about the experience?
Um, I I love that book. Working on that book, there were some pages that are hard and agonizing, that really shouldn't be. Probably, I don't even know. Each issue was my favorite issue as I was working on it. And
Yeah,
it was such a joy of like trying to, by the time we had issue one was probably the hardest, even though we were just having fun and didn't know if anything was going to come of it. And then each subsequent issue, we were just trying to put everything we could into it. And that, I don't know, it was just really rewarding. The hardest part about it is penciling, always just trying to
yeah,
get the figures to look decent and things like that. But the storytelling is the whole way through is just my favorite part of doing it and coming up with, how are we going to tell this? I don't know. I love all that.
nice. I did wonder too about how much of the sort of the chronology, like when this is set, is you deciding on clothing design, and like what buildings look like and what kind of equipment they're using as you're going, and how much of that is like a conversation and a collaboration with Matthew.
Me and Matt I would say, are a full 50-50 split on collaboration. I think he'd agree. So, there is stuff as far as like Matt will be like, it's a suburban road with a mailbox or something. But then it comes through me and it's my version of that. And so it looks like Buffalo, which is where I grew up. So
Mm,
everything has this very Buffalo thing. There's stuff where Matt and me both very pointedly were like, this takes place in a sort of no time.
mm,
We got the idea sort of from the movie It Follows,
mhm.
which kind of exists in the 70s, but also maybe the 80s, but also maybe right now.
Yeah,
And so we sort of try to do that where we try to create our own little, it's realism, but it's not everything's. So there's 70s and 80s and 90s and current time all sort of wrapped up in it. One thing Matt likes to bring up sometimes when we're talking about it is like, for instance, like when the kids, I think it's in issue 2, are riding their bikes to the bad guy's house.
yeah,
Walter, I put him in a hockey helmet, like a caged hockey helmet that kids would wear in Pee Wee, and that's just the thing that kids used to do where I grew up because everybody in Buffalo loves hockey, and that's
Ah,
the helmet that they had. And Matt like texted me. He's like, "What the fuck is this?" Sorry, I don't know if I can swear. Sorry, my
no,
bad.
you're fine.
So I'll try not to swear. And I was like, "Oh, that's." He's like, "You didn't have that?" And he's like, "No, I grew up in New York City. Nobody wore hockey helmets on their bikes."
That's
So
funny. See, I
there's
thought
weird.
that was just a weird Walter quirk where it was
Yeah,
like he needed the extra protection, yeah, or something.
yeah. I mean, he needs it for his glasses, but yeah, I mean, like, not everybody would. I don't know. So that was just and then that came back later when we did the trade, and I came up with this idea of how we should do the opening of the trade credits, and I was like, oh well, we already have the hockey helmet, so let's have Paige and Stretch be on Pee Wee or Squirt.
Nice.
I guess they'd be on Squirt at that level.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, cool. So, final for kids question specifically
Mm-hmm.
before we go to some broader stuff. The book ends fairly abruptly with a surprising time jump epilogue. What are the chances of a sequel? And if you can't answer that, how much did you and Matt talk about potentially, I guess, continuing the collaboration into the future?
There will never be a sequel.
Okay.
The book is the book. That's all it is. We will never do it. I know some people would like that, but we really, stories have to end. As much as we
Yeah.
love like superhero comics that go on forever and things like that, we're big proponents of stories. Curtain comes up, you meet a character. Curtain comes down, the character's changed, and hopefully you, the reader, are too. And so, we've toyed with the idea of, and when I say we, I say I wanted to do a sort of prequel one-shot issue for like Free Comic Book Day or like something, and do a Christmas / Hanukkah, Kwanzaa sort of holiday issue.
Mhm.
That's just like one tiny like 60-page or 40-page adventure. So that's something we may do. It's something he doesn't seem too keen on, but I think it would be really fun to do that and sort of have it be like a Free Comic Book Day thing.
Yeah.
And just as like a thank you to everybody who supported the book and loved the book, to give them just like one little small, thing. The reference I always use too, I was like, we should do the Star Wars holiday special. And Matt's like, that's terrible. And I was like, I know, but it'll be really fun. Like that's why I want to do it. But yeah, no, it's the book's the book. And, we have a book we're working on that sort of, there's nods back to Four Kids in it, and it's sort of a spiritual sequel. But each book we do it has an ending. We know what the ending is before we even start, because that's actually how we work. We start with the end, and then we work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very cool. No, I think that's totally fair. I think it 100% stands on its own. So, yeah, I think as a fan, it's like on one hand, you always want more of the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
you like, but that definitely the way culture just keeps churning out the same content, it is nice to hear like, no, that good thing ended and it's going to stay good. And that can be enough sometimes.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
All right, cool. Are there any elements of the book, even if it's like specific little gags you put in that you don't see people talking about that you kind of like either you
Wish
just think are
people.
fun or wish people had noticed?
I can't. People were pretty good about picking up on all the gags, and sometimes they picked up on gags that Matt wrote in that I didn't even notice.
Nice.
But like, no, I don't think. I'm gonna pull the book out and flip through it for a second. But people
Yeah.
really seem to get it. For the most part. I mean, I don't think. I don't. I feel like even people even got like a George Bellows reference I made, which is crazy.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like yeah, the only thing I think is interesting is some people seem to be I wouldn't call it a controversy, but there's a conversation around what happens to Berger at the end of the book about why he's not back at
He's not there, right?
he's not there at the end. But I'm not going to say anything either way about it on the podcast, just in case somebody hasn't read the book and then they listen to this and want to read it.
Yeah.
But there's that's one thing that I thought was interesting, because I thought we made it pretty clear, but maybe not.
Okay. Good. I actually hadn't really considered that as a controversy now that you mention it, but now I'm kind of curious. It's got that kind of fade to black. What do I make of things vibe to
Yeah.
it, I suppose. Berger's such a fantastic character too.
One thing to note is all of the bad guys and are named after Rosenberg's childhood friends.
Hmm.
And then Berger is named after one of his childhood friends as well. And there was this weird moment where I didn't know that. And I was in LA with Matthew, and we were staying at Matt Hayes, who's one of the characters, but was also a real person. We were staying at his house. We apparently were going to go out to dinner. We went out to barbecue, and I was sitting at this table with them, and I was looking around, and everybody was introducing themselves. And I didn't realize, like, I was having dinner with all of the bad guys in the book that I was drawing.
Yeah.
And it was very weird.
Like, am I about to rob a bank? What is
Yeah,
going on here?
Was this the real setup all along?
That's amazing. I did want to ask a little bit too. As you were working on this, you and you can correct me on the chronology here, but you've done work inking and coloring Lazarus and working pretty closely with Michael Lark, the artist. What have you taken from that experience? Because you've been on the book for a good run now, and I guess in addition to the experience there, like how do you differentiate like work on Lazarus from then keeping your own style and your own sort of distinct vision?
Sure. So I recently just left Lazarus. So I think my last issue would have been the newest one coming out.
Is that the Lazarus Risen mini?
Yeah, number 2, I think, was the last one I did, or maybe it was number 3. But I got that gig. I mean, that's another one that I got from working in a comic shop. Danny Lore, who's they're a fantastic writer. They just had a book with Vita Ayala come out, their first Marvel book, Ironheart. But they also worked at Forbidden Planet, and they are huge Greg Rucka fans, and thus they were Lazarus fans. And they had seen on Tumblr that Michael was doing an open call for submissions for people to be his background assistant. And so I did it on a whim and got it, which was cool.
That's awesome.
And it was the thing I took most from it was Michael was really patient with me. I definitely wasn't up to snuff when he took me on, and so he was really patient about helping me get there to sort of be on a professional level. And it taught me a lot, honestly, because I only ever inked the backgrounds, and it definitely, a thing that I see people comment about in my commission work or in my actual work is they talk about the level of architecture or attention to detail in the backgrounds. And it's not that I have a detailed style, but I think everything isn't random. It's very considered, and I think that definitely comes from having worked with Michael for, I think at that point, I think I worked with them for 5 years.
Yeah.
It was weird too, because, when I was younger, I read comics up until I was maybe 12. And then I was like, okay, I'm into skateboarding and I would like a girlfriend at some point. And so I set the comics aside, which was stupid because comics rule. But
a familiar path, I think.
A familiar story. Yeah. But at 15 or 16, after the 3-year break, I went into a Borders and I was walking through saw that they had graphic novels now, which was not a thing when I was reading comics. You used to have to get them. My grandma would buy them for me at flea markets and yard sales and stuff. And so I was walking through the racks and really excited to see that there was these nice book volumes of comic books now with complete stories. And I saw one that was Gotham City Central. And I was like, oh, that's a police procedural, but Batman's kind of in the background and the style seems really cool. And so I got it, and that was what got me back into comics, was Gotham City Central. So it's funny that my first real professional job was working with the people, Greg and Michael, who got me back into it. Incredibly sweet people.
No, it's very cool. Yeah, no, it's awesome. I actually didn't I've read Lazarus, and then I was looking through your bibliography and realized that whole time that was a book you were also on. I was oh, that's awesome. It's the same guy. So yeah, that's really cool. You had that opportunity to grow there. I do want to talk before we go about your upcoming Dead Dog Bites work from Dark Horse. How long has the book been in the works, and what can you tell us?
The book's been in the works, honestly, for probably 3 years at this point. I was sort of half, I scribbled notes while I was working on 4 Kids, just different, oh, what if we do this? What if we do this? As an idea. And so I just gestated on it for a very long time, and sort of I had the ending of the book and knew what I wanted it to be, but from the beginning, and then did the thing where I work backwards to where we should start. But it wasn't until 2 years ago, I guess a year ago at New York Comic Con, not this past one, but the one before, Brett
Mhm.
at Dark Horse, who's an editor, he came and asked me, if I had anything to pitch. And I was like, well, I have this thing, but you probably don't want it. It's like kind of weird, and it's a mystery comic and a crime comic, and I know those don't sell, and it'd be only me working on it. Matt's not there, so you probably don't want it. And he was like, no, I came to talk to you
Strong
because I'd like
pitch,
you to,
strong pitch.
yeah. You lead with it's like when I was in high school and I purposely only got C's so that when I got a B, mom was real proud. But he hassled me enough that I was like, all right, I guess I'll build up this pitch, and I sent it to him, and it was approved in like an hour.
Nice.
And then I started working on it from there. And it was supposed to come out April 8th, and obviously because of the world right now, it didn't. I don't know when it's coming out, but of the 4 issues, 3 are done. 4 is slowly being finished, but I'm not at full pace on it because it's I need to be doing some other stuff to make some money while we wait for the book to come out. But I don't know. It's a weird, kind of funny, kind of sad mystery story about a 17-year-old self-described detective. But it's a little Twin Peaksy, a little Twilight Zoney, a little blanking on the name of the movie. Greta Gerwig, little Ladybird in there.
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely some Paul Thomas Anderson because I can't seem to get away from it.
Sure. No, it sounds awesome. I'm really looking forward to the book. So hopefully we can see that first issue in the near future as the comics machine gets wheels turning again. And hopefully the world gets turning again here sooner rather than later. Would be nice. So let me ask you a question then with Dead Dog's Bite. How different is the process for you writing and drawing? Your own work compared, not that you haven't done stuff in the past, but I think if I'm not mistaken, like this is probably your biggest, published written and drawn series.
Definitely.
How different is that process versus the level of collaboration you have done in the past?
So it kind of informed my process for it. So when I decided that I was going to try and write this whole thing, I made a decision to do full scripts. As though I was writing it for a new artist.
Yeah.
Because I thought that'd be a good practice. And if I ever do, there's some books that I have ideas for that I maybe can't, I just don't have the bandwidth to draw, but I would still like to create. And so I wanted that practice of, okay, can we write full script in a way that, somebody else could take and draw it. It's a little easier because since I'm already an artist or a cartoonist, I know kind of already what I want the page breakdown to be or how it to look. And so when I'm scripting, I sort of already have what each panel is going to be, and I don't need to play with it too much. But it's fun when I get to the art stage or the coloring stage, and I'm penciling and I look at my scripts and, I add things or change things. So it speeds things up and it slows things down, but it's an interesting process of doing it. I don't know. I'd be interested to see what it'd be like if I did it more Marvel style for myself, but I kind of like doing the full scripting.
Are you coloring and inking and everything too?
Yeah, coloring, inking, lettering, the whole thing. Dang,
whole project.
Yeah, the whole thing, which is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's rewarding, but I'm glad that I gave myself like a year to do 4 issues, and the 4 issues are longer. They're all like 30 pages. So you're basically getting a 5-issue series, but I thought I'd be smart and only make it 4, but unfortunately it's longer. No, for sure.
Cool. Well, I'm very much looking forward to that. Did you have anything else that you have on the horizon or that you wanted to promote before I wrap things up?
There's probably going to be an announcement about something cool, hopefully in the next week or 2. That is cryptic, and all I can say about it. But besides,
looking forward to that cryptic news. Yeah. So we're recording this on May 22nd for those of you who are getting that announcement. So looking like the week of May 25th or the start of June here, 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. So that should hopefully be cool, and hopefully people will be excited about it. And then besides that, look out for whenever Dead Dogs, we get a new release date for it. And then I'm also streaming, drawing, and inking commissions and playing some games with some other cartoonists and friends on Twitch at Boy Cartoonist, which if you're bored, come hang out. We're nice, I think.
A welcoming environment. Good, good to know. All right, very cool. Thanks so much, Tyler. I appreciate you hopping on for this, and it was a super pleasure to talk to you.
You too, Dave. Thanks so much for having me, man.